Next we've got Derek coming up, and he's going to talk about the sort of technology side of how we can save the planet. His mission is to support the growth of sustainability professions and folding sustainability data into business, which is fascinating, and he's going to tell us what that actually means. Welcome, Derek.
So I want to thank all of you here at Blink for having me here, and to thank Becky and Virginia also. I really appreciate the things that Becky is saying, because she's been providing this service to all of us for over 20 years, actually working with the legislature and working on regulations. Some of the regulations that she has helped bring about actually are business motivators in my work and help me get revenue. So thank you, Becky, for that. I'm with a company called Scope 5, and we have actually benefited from at least one of the Jeff's services who are here tonight. And we help companies actually, not companies, but the actual sustainability professionals who work in the companies back up their sustainability claims with data and with science. So I'm here to talk tonight about what business is doing that you can actually measure, how you can be a part of holding businesses accountable, how you can understand whether a company is lying or kind of greenwashing or doing all of those things. My role is selling these services and software to mostly large and medium organizations, and I meet with hundreds of sustainability people a year, so I get to hear their stories over coffees and cocktails and lunches, and it's very inspiring. Sometimes it's very frustrating and depressing, because the reality is, for a lot of the people who are working in this field in business, they're not supported by their executive management. So a lot of why I'm here today is to help you, to help them, if that's something that you want to do. So moving forward, and my Twitter handle's up here. If anybody wants to tweet, it always helps me in sales. It's at Derek Eisel. Up next. So I was just back in North Carolina visiting my family. And this is kind of a like depressing slide, right? Like oceans rising, that kind of thing. But at the same time, this area is called Nags Head, North Carolina, or Outer Banks. Has anybody ever been there? Cool. And it's a beautiful place. I've been going there since I was 8, which is a really long time ago. And the houses have been falling into the sea since I've been going there. So back then, no one was talking about climate change. It was just hurricanes. If you go there, there's some people who are definitely talking about climate change. You can see it in the brand new piers that are built out of concrete and that have wind turbines on them and lots of signage. And then there are other people who are saying, oh, it's hurricanes, we don't know this is climate change, we don't really believe in that stuff. So I believe in science. And I'm here to kind of ask this question of like, well, what's real? How do we know when we hear these different claims, different things? How do we actually investigate? So how do we know there's hurricanes or climate change or what? What's real? I don't remember how many years ago, I was sitting in a cubicle downtown near where Becky said we'd all get burnt down by a coal train exploding, actually, at a company called Expeditors. And I was a software tester. And I was looking out my window, and there were people marching down the street, like 2 stories down from me, wearing these really adorable sea turtle costumes, and a lot of tension, because I was working in a global freight company, and we were shipping things all over the world. We were enabling consumerism, capitalism, all these things. I was making decent money. I was putting money away to be able to afford a mortgage and all these things. But I'd been an environmentalist my whole life, and I was feeling very conflicted. And I actually ended up in the hospital that day with my appendix rupturing. So I, to this day, think that appendix inflammation is a moral crisis, and that I was having one. And it made me think, like, what's my impact? So I started talking to people within the company saying, well, what is our carbon footprint? You know, I read this book that Al Gore wrote. You know, I'm curious about climate change. Like, we ship things all over the world. Is anybody measuring this? You know, are we getting any questions from customers about this? Are employees, do they care about it? And I was just asking those questions, and one day I got a call at my desk, and it was a VP from our company that I'd never met, and he said, hey, I heard you've been asking environmental questions. And I was like, yeah. And he said, can you come to my office? And so I went up to the 13th floor, or the top floor of the building, and I sat down, and I was like, am I getting fired? And he's like, he laughed, and he said, no, I want your help. We are getting questions, and the questions were coming from Walmart. So this is a kind of fancy Walmart in Canada picture. But as a result of that, I got to start leading the work to identify a sustainability program. And over the course of several years, we pulled in executives from all over the company. We started measuring our impact, and we started reporting our impact. And it really helped the company in their sales cycles, you know, because there were clients like Nike and others who were very environmentally innovative, and they wanted to know what their carbon footprint was for their transportation, shipping shoes, and all this stuff all over the world. So Expeditors saw the business advantage of doing this, and to their credit, they funded it and they made it real. And that's what I do now with other companies. I provide them tooling to do that kind of measurement and reporting. Next slide, oil companies, you know, lots of black smoke and emissions, and they're responsible for a big part of the emissions pie. But I'm sure we all know this, like, oil companies are producing a product that they sell and that we buy. So when we take an Uber, when we, you know, open up our package of, you know, whatever that's been shipped to us in the last 2 hours, like, we are consuming fuel through these other companies. So we can all complain about the oil companies, and fortunately, through work that Becky does and a lot of others, they are regulated. But all of these other companies that aren't oil companies, they are not really regulated in terms of climate. So I'm not going to call out specific names other than of the people who are innovating and doing kind of great jobs here, but if you look at what you're wearing, at what you drove here in, or a number, who built your house, like, all those companies, they're not having to measure and report their climate numbers. And even with the legislation that's being proposed, they're not going to be required to measure any of that stuff. The good news is that a lot of people are measuring that anyway, but it's entirely voluntary. And part of the reason I'm here is to, you know, ask you to help the people in those organizations to get more support for that voluntary work that they're doing. So, you know, how can I contribute, or how can you contribute, and if you choose to? So, why are all the women standing next to me smiling? Because they're measurably reducing greenhouse gases. So these are sustainability directors and managers who work for companies. There's Alaska Airlines, Virginia Mason, Outer Wall represented here. And these are sustainability people in organizations who are actually doing the work to measure all the electricity that is in the buildings where the employees are, the fuel that goes into the flights for them to go on trips, commuting, all the things that add up to climate change. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you know whether their work is real. So next up, I tweeted this out. There was an article in the Puget Sound Business Journal about Alaska Air and Boeing are cutting greenhouse gas emissions with beer cans. So, you know, that's cute. You know, we all love seeing the recycling that's happening in flight, or I do. The Alaska Airlines are definitely my favorite airline. And we were a part of calculating their carbon footprint, full disclosure. But how do you know what's marketing here and what is more real? Just because you see somebody collecting beer cans or recycled cups on a flight, does that mean they're sustainable? I mean, you're in an airplane that's burning a lot of jet fuel. So how do you figure that stuff out? One way that you can do this is by looking at a website called CSR Hub. And CSR Hub is collecting data from a whole lot of different locations where environmental reporting is happening. And it's all voluntary reporting here. So Alaska Airlines is choosing to disclose its footprint, which is very innovative and shows a lot of leadership, because there are a lot of airlines that are not doing this. You can go on this site, and I'd encourage you to do this if you're somebody who's deeply green or cares about this a lot. Whenever you have a company that you're thinking about, if you're thinking about different airlines, you can check out how they're doing. There's ratings here on community, employees, environment, governance, getting to some of the things that Becky was talking about. They're not just environmental, but also social justice. I went to a talk recently. These are the two Kevins, Kevin Wilhelm and Kevin Hagen here in Seattle. One of whom is the head of sustainable business consulting, and the other is the head of sustainability for Iron Mountain. Iron Mountain's a company that comes and shreds all your documents, does things like that. So these two men have been working in sustainability for I don't know how many years, a really long time. One of them wrote a book about sustainability jobs, but how do you know if Iron Mountain is doing something positive in the world of sustainability? Well, you can see press releases that come out. So this one, it's talking about a wind farm that Iron Mountain is helping to have built. And this is one of the amazing things that some of the corporations have been doing to reduce the demand for the oil and the coal, so that we don't have to build the infrastructure for the oil terminals, because we replace it with the wind turbines. And a lot of that work just would not happen if these big corporations weren't committing funding through purchase agreements that last for decades sometimes, that say, we promise to buy energy from you at this price. So they provide a consistent demand for an alternative way of producing fuel. So, you read articles like this, and it's like, well, that's pretty awesome. I think Iron Mountain's pretty great. But what's another way that you can go and find out how Iron Mountain is doing? You can look at CDP. So CDP is the Carbon Disclosure Project. These are all websites that you can find with the Bing search, or however you choose to search things. And you can go here and you do a search on Iron Mountain, and you're going to see if they disclose their metrics. And if you look a little deeper, you can see what they disclose. And I would encourage you to do that, because if a company is not reporting at all to CDP, and they're of a significant size, then they're, in my opinion, not doing this work. So I would not trust them with my business. And I actually make decisions around this kind of stuff. I mean, if they're of a certain size, I'm not saying you guys have to disclose to CDP, but if you're talking to companies that are like 1,000 employees plus, 10,000 employees, operations from, many facilities around the world, they've got some kind of footprint to manage. And if they're not disclosing it through the Carbon Disclosure Project, like Microsoft, Boeing, and Alaska, and all these other organizations, I would seriously question what it is they're doing. Other ways that you can check this stuff out, you can always go and look at company websites. So you just do a search on the company and add the word sustainability. And here is Virginia Mason's website. They're one of our clients. We were just talking about Brenna Davis, who's their sustainability director, who's also the chair of the Washington Business Climate Action Group that's been lobbying the legislature for a price on carbon. And you can look in the site and see if you find anything about a carbon footprint. If they don't talk about carbon numbers, that's another indication it's not very mature. Because if they're not measuring that stuff, you don't really know what they're doing. And one of the key things to see on these sites is like, if it's leading with a picture of a beach cleanup and it's a big company, that's an indication it's not very real, you know, in my opinion. Because that stuff was cool 15 years ago, but now we're way past that. Another thing you can do is another client of Scope 5, this is the city of Bellevue. We've now got 4 cities who are tracking their progress towards legislated climate targets set by King County. This is a really simple dashboard we call storyboard, which our technology enables them to select certain charts and graphs based on the data that they calculate in our system, and they can populate that with a narrative to kind of a Tumblr site style that is shared with the public. So once they fully make their story, they feel good about it, they've got the data to support it, they can publish this out to their constituents. I'm just kind of closing here with a few reminders of ways that you can look to see if companies are doing something real and how you can help sustainability professionals. And just one more note about that, like, if there's a sustainability professional working in a company, and you think like, wow, I wish that company would be doing more, but I don't want to create a problem for their sustainability professional. You're not creating a problem for them by asking these questions. You're saving their job by asking these questions. Because when a sustainability professional exists in an organization and they never get questions through investor relations, they never get questions from their supply chain, they never get questions through employees, it's like, what are they doing? They have nothing to do. There's no demand for the metrics. In some of the organizations, like your Patagonias and people that are really leading from a top-down on this, the top-down executives care and they support the work. Even those cases, it's nice to get pressure from the outside. So you're doing everybody a favor in the company by asking these questions, and especially if you do it kind of the way that I'm going to describe here. So first, to find these companies, you know, if you think about, you get something from a delivery site and you want to know how environmentally friendly they are, put their name in CDP and search on it. Put their name in CSR Hub and search on it. Look at their company website and look for carbon footprint and look for the actual numbers. And for extra credit, you can see like, or have they been tracking this stuff for a long time? Are those numbers decreasing? I think it's nice just to see any kind of reporting of numbers right now. It'd be great to see them decreasing, but in a lot of cases, they're not decreasing. A lot of the companies they want to grow their revenues, and they haven't been able to find the funding sources to make the infrastructural changes that cost money, that have capital expenditures. They don't have support in those organizations to do anything but the kind of low-hanging fruit, easy kind of incremental things. So in a lot of those organizations, they're not reducing their footprint. So that's where it's helpful if you hold them accountable. Another thing to look for is, do they have a full-time sustainability role? Many of these companies are doing this work with part-time people, meaning they're not part-time to the organization, but meaning, I'll throw out an example, I won't name the company, but one of the people I talked to is a full-time IT director, and he's also the sustainability director. So you can imagine that that's kind of a big workload to handle both of those things. So do they have a full-time sustainability role? Next, I made kind of a very deliberate decision in my career to not name names publicly about the people that I talked to who aren't really able to do good work in this space because they don't have support. But you can find them by doing the kind of searches that I'm talking about. And it's important to follow up with them directly and a call in versus call out approach, I think. There's a lot of people calling out a lot of companies. But if you know somebody at the company, maybe you know the CFO at a company, ask them what the carbon footprint is. Tell them you're concerned about the risks of climate change to the revenues of their business. Ask them what they're doing. If you know whoever you know at the company that gets up towards an executive level, talk to them. Contact investor relations for companies where you have stocks. Ask for the CO2 numbers. Ask to talk to their sustainability person. So these are all things you can do that is going to help those sustainability people, and it's going to help us to actually demonstrate measurable reductions in carbon. And I think I will stop there. So thank you very much.